Last-minute shakeup at 5:30 a.m., laundry situation not good. And when your focus is on helping your clients, it's easy to forget about yourself. But NASM knows trainers.
Morning ride is okay.
And staying in front of the day isn't always as simple as 1, 2, 3. So when the unexpected has you pressing pause,
What's the latest on creatine?
I'm going to get back to you on that.
let NASM1 help you press play. Visit NASM.org to sign up for a membership today.
Hey everyone, welcome to Strong Mind, Strong Body. I hope you are doing well today. We are going to talk about stress, something that a lot of us talk about, and I think pretty much all of us want to manage stress in a more healthful way so that we can navigate life feeling a lot more grounded. So today our topic is how to break free from stress. And we know theoretically that stress is not something, it's not the goal to get rid of stress, that stress is always going to be a part of life. But I think the goal really is how do we navigate stress so that it doesn't take over our lives. So I have a guest today who's been on before. His name is Jim Porter. He is the CEO of Stress Stop. And Jim is going to help us discover kind of some of the outdated science of fight or flight and why relaxation often feels, quote, un-American, as well as why doctor visits are often stress related, but kind of go undiagnosed, if you will. So I'm going to bring Jim in, let him introduce himself. We're going to deep dive into how to help you and your clients break free from stress. How you doing, Jim?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here and glad to be part of your show.
You bet. Tell us a little bit about your business. I think that would help everybody to get some context as to what you do and who you serve.
Sure. Of course, our company name is Stress Stop, and we've been in business for over 30 years. They say you teach what you most need to learn, and I don't think I could have maintained my interest in the subject of stress for as long as I have if there wasn't something in it for me. But besides that, we're basically our business is primarily now a web portal that a lot of companies across the United States are using to help their employees manage stress. So it's got a lot of stress management advice, but it's also got advice about diet and nutrition and how to get a good night's sleep and things that are tangentially related to stress.
Yeah, I agree. And the funny thing is that I too think that, you teach what you most want to practice and inhabit in your life. And, I taught stress management at a university level for 5 years. And that was the best I feel like I ever was able to manage stress. And I've said before, it's ironic because it was at a highly stressful time in my life where my life seemed to be crumbling, but yet just inhabiting and embodying those concepts of managing stress is really what got me through. And also to your point of helping other people manage stress, it kind of is a gentle reminder that we too need to pay attention to what we're paying attention to, right?
Absolutely. I think that one of the things that I've always in the materials that I've read over the years, and behind those curtains behind me are bookshelves full of a couple hundred books on the subject of stress, and over the years, the idea that you need to walk your talk is more than just an adage. It's really helpful to be able to tell people stories that convey a message more than just giving them advice. One of my favorite ones is when I was one of the first things I read was that you should keep a journal of your stress. Like, just keep track of your stress for a week or two. Every little stressful thing that happens that you should keep track of. And I thought, and I resisted doing it. I thought, oh, I don't want to do that. And for about 10 years, I've been doing this for over 30. So for the first 10 years, I didn't do it. And finally, I did it for 2 weeks. And I wrote down every little stressful thing that happened. And at the end of and I didn't really look at it until the 2 weeks, but I wrote a little note about what had happened in each situation where I'd experienced stress. And one of the things I noticed in the journal was that I'd experienced stress doing the same thing in 3 different places. And this is 20 years ago, probably wouldn't happen exactly the same way now, but 20 years ago, I experienced stress at the bank, the grocery store, and the Department of Motor Vehicles. You want to guess what I was doing? You want to guess what I was doing? And it was the same thing. This was a real eye opener for me. It really taught me an important lesson personally that I can now teach to other people. But what do you think I was doing in all three places? Same thing.
Okay, you're at the grocery store, you're at the bank, and you're at the DMV. Are you waiting in line?
Exactly. Bingo. Good for you. 50% of people get that right. And the other 50% say I was spending money, which can be a source of stress. Anyway, I was waiting in line. Now, here's the takeaway from that. And this is a story because I'm trying to walk my talk that I can convey with really personal impact to everybody that I talk to. So the takeaway is it wasn't the bank, the grocery store, and the DMV that was causing me stress. It was waiting in line. So all I needed to do was to figure out how to go to those places when there weren't any lines. Now, of course, we can bank online, we can shop, even the grocery store will deliver. So there are other solutions available. And even the DMV has now got a lot of things. Most of it I can do online. So, so those solutions came along and provided, but the idea of waiting in line, I'm always looking out for, how I can avoid that. And that's a really great lesson. And that all comes from attempting to walk your talk, do what it is you're telling other people to do.
Well, I really appreciate that story. A, because I love stories, and B, because to your point, I think that stories inhabit concepts and we remember stories, not concepts. Right. So
Yeah.
the funny thing is that, you recognize what that meant. And then what I really hear is that you became solution focused. Okay, Jim, if I don't like waiting in line, what can I do to avoid waiting in line? So I love that. And a lot of times now, gosh, you can order your groceries online. You don't even have to wait in line. And to your point, you can do a lot of the DMV stuff online. What's interesting is I was listening to Simon Sinek this morning because I'm a big fan, and I was driving and I was listening to one of his YouTube talks, and he was talking about, I can't even remember what the thing was, but one of the concepts that he mentioned was that he was running with a friend, and at the end they always give something away, and they had free bagels, and he wanted to go stand in line and get a bagel, and his friend was like, no, the line is too long. And he said, he tells this funny story that he goes up in front of the entire line and he grabs two bagels and cuts, and no one says a word. But his point of the story was that he said, I realized then that there are people who focus on what they want, and then there are people who focus on the obstacles that are in the way of what they want. Don't quote me on that. But basically, he's like, I focus on what I want. I don't focus on what's in the way or standing in my way of what I want. And I thought that was such a powerful thing. And I thought in a way that's highly related to stress, because if you're focused on the problem, which is the long line, instead of just like the solution or your goal, which is, hey, I'm going to get a free bagel. It's like when I run a race and there's beer at the end and there's 2,000 people in line. I'm pretty sure they can get a beer anywhere, but it's the idea that the beer is the reward for running the race, and they know what they want they know that they want that award. I hope that kind of supplemented your story, but I thought that was a really good one.
Yeah, no, I think it really does. In fact, one of the sort of people that I've listened to over the years is a guy named Brian Tracy, and he always says, focus on what you want, not on what you don't want. And kind of another way of putting that is, this was advice I heard at a wellness conference years ago. See, and here's my assignment for everybody listening. See if you can go 24 hours without complaining. You're going to be shocked at how often a complaint pops out of your mouth. And it's an aspect of what we're talking about here. It's more focused on what's wrong rather than what you can do about it.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good one. Well, you know what? So, Jim, I feel like we could tell stories all day long, and actually I would love to. But we'll see each other at a conference in the near future. We'll tell more stories then. But let's talk about this idea of breaking free from stress and kind of what happens in our society. I know one of the things that you talk about is that you say that our culture promotes stress, and I definitely think that it does. And so give us some lay of the land about how our culture promote stress and what we can do to balance that out.
Yeah, I think it has to do with just being busy all the time. I think it has to do with cell phones, and I realize that people are terrified of being bored, even for 30 seconds. So, they're always on their phones, and is their phone really delivering anything that they really need that's helping them be more in their lives at that moment? It's really taking them away from their life. I think there's lots of aspects where we as human beings are feeling, well, we need to be busy all the time. Hurry sickness is another issue that people seem to take from, either hating to wait, and then feeling like anything that might cause you to wait is stressful. So, the whole idea of, waiting in a line is could be stressful. So everything about the workplace, I mean, we've got a culture of wanting to be crazy busy. It's just a cultural norm to our work ethic. It's like there's no relaxation ethic, is there?
Right. What's interesting about that is I find that more and more there's a lot of retreat spaces, a lot of wellness retreat spaces that specifically say that you have to wire down. So I went to a spa with my daughter, and I went last Thursday, and it is a specific device-free environment. And I asked her because she works at this resort, and I said, "Do you guys get lashback from that?" And she said, not generally, but sometimes. She said, one thing that people say is we allow people to bring books, and some people will read on a Kindle, and they'll say, well, why can't I bring my Kindle in? And the rule is nothing that is technology driven. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Because we stayed there for 7 hours and we were not able to check our phones or anything, but we went back to our locker a couple of times to like change or grab this or that. And I kept seeing my daughter check her phone, and I called her out and I was like, hey, you're checking your phone. But it's funny how you sometimes almost have to pay big bucks to go into an environment where somebody is almost like putting you in a classroom and saying, no, you can't do that. And then we're like, okay. But it's almost a relief to be in an environment where somebody prohibits us from being able to get on devices, right? But that's
Well,
almost kind of sad. I shouldn't have
yeah,
to pay for that.
right, right. That does seem kind of ironic. But I've been on a 6-day retreat with John Kabat-Zinn, and 36 hours of that where we weren't allowed to read a book, look at a phone, look at a computer, read a newspaper. And we even had to maintain custody of the eyes, which meant you couldn't look somebody else, or you couldn't talk to anybody, of course. Yeah, you realize how addicted you are after 36 hours, and you just can't believe that you can go that long. I was just up at a yoga retreat a couple of weeks ago with Deepak Chopra, and that was 3 days of them really encouraging you not to carry. You weren't allowed to carry your phone out of your room, but you certainly were encouraged not to look at it at all. And we're all, everybody. I think of low level addictions as being, you know, um, more prominent, more prevalent than anybody realizes. That something that maybe doesn't demand the attention that a high level addiction like alcoholism or some sort of drug addiction might. But these low level addictions, they run our lives, and people don't realize it.
Yeah, 100%. So, in some of your information, you talk about how doctors receive very little training, very little to no training in stress-related illnesses. And even if they did, they often don't have the time to dispense any advice. And yet you have a statistic in one of your blogs that says that 75 to 90% of all doctor visits are stress-related concerns. And so when, you say like, when's the last time you heard a doctor mention stress? Well, I think doctors do mention stress. I think they will say, are you under a lot of stress? And stress can cause this, this, and this. But I'm not sure that they have like the time to really sit down and say, and what are you doing to manage it? Or like they might give you the insight or the scary part of, oh my gosh, did you know stress can kill you? And then you walk out of the office more heightened, because I think we already know that. But what can providers do, not just physicians, but fitness and wellness pros, coaches? What can we do to kind of really influence people's mindsets and not just scare them, but actually help them with tools to break free from this stress epidemic, if you will?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, I think if you're with somebody that you're getting counseling from and you have an hour to talk to them, well, then you're in good, then that's going to be somebody who probably is going to be able to, let's say, be qualified to offer advice about stress. That's really the only outlet I can think of off the top of my head, other than, just, I think uh, I always say social support is our number one weapon against stress. And there's so many different ways that you can get social support, whether it's talking to a friend, whether it's talking to a spiritual counselor, or joining a support group, or I mean, obviously a doctor. I don't think a doctor is the place to go to when I mean, I've got an annual visit coming up, and I'll have 10 minutes with the guy, and I already have 3 questions that are going to have nothing to do with stress, and they're going to take up the entire 10 minutes. So you're not going to get that. They just don't have the time, and they really don't know how to diagnose stress, and they're going to give you a pill because they really don't. I always give the story, like, you go out, you find that you have this rash, when hives and rashes are often caused by stress. But the doctor's going to say, well, were you out in the woods or gardening at any time since you got this rash? And they'll say, oh, well, it's probably you touched poison ivy or something like that. So they're going to go for the easy solution. They're not going to go looking deeper for a solution that can be caused by stress. And typically they're going to prescribe a cortisone cream, and cortisone is a stress chemical that we release when we're stressed. So a lot of times people in that situation where they have skin rashes or hives, whatever they take makes it worse if it's caused by stress.
Right.
I don't know. I think this is a conundrum that you're asking me, well, what's the solution to that? I don't think there is a solution right now, except to educate yourself. Go to our website and start the education process. I mean, there are plenty of other sources of information. The Mayo Clinic. Every time I want to get some medical advice, I go to the Mayo Clinic website, and they have great advice about the relationship between stress and the various diseases that can be caused or exacerbated by stress.
Well, and I think that maybe we're not even, you've already said, we've already talked about, one of the first things we talked about was that it's so important to focus on what we want versus the obstacles that are getting in the way of what we want. I think we have to keep a razor sharp focus on, what do you want? Yes, there are always going to be obstacles and barriers. But what's more important is, what do you ultimately want? And then you can take each of those barriers and say, okay, this is how I'll deal with this. This is how I'll deal with this barrier. But I think the first step is, what do you really want? You're going to know that there's always going to be obstacles and barriers, but then you're going to one by one determine how you're going to work through those. And I think another thing that we've talked about is always focus on solution versus the problem. There's always going to be problems, always. But it's, what about that problem can I control? Or my favorite thing is, what about that problem is about me? So often the problem is bigger in my mind, and some of it has to do with how I'm conceptualizing the problem. And then you mentioned social support, and we also talked about therapy and coaching. So I think those right there are 5 powerful ways of managing stress, and those are incredibly important. And I think also you mentioned journaling and just writing down, what are all the things that cause you stress, and then realizing after a week or so, oh, well, there's some simple solutions here. All 3 of those places caused me stress because I had to wait in line. I don't want to wait in line anymore. So I think you're giving away a lot of the goods, if you will. But you also work with a lot of companies. And I know you've talked about how companies a lot of times are in denial about stress, and that job-related stress is often sourced as the number one source of stress for a lot of us. And I think you and I both have this idea that it is up to companies to get more involved in how to help their employees, right? I mean,
Yeah.
isn't that kind of where your business model
Oh,
comes
that's
in?
my business is all about that.
Yeah. So when you go into these companies and you're like, look, you can't just say, "Oh, I'm sorry you're stressed at work." You've got to provide people tools for how to manage the stress, right? So what are some of the things that you know, offer to these companies to say, "This is what you can do to help your employees." I think one of them is an employee assistance program, right? To let them have therapy?
Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, that's not what I am selling with my company is, but we support EAPs. A lot of our platforms are carried by the EAP department of the various companies that use it. It's almost, I would say, 90% or the EAP is providing people with our platform. But yeah, so there, I mean, when you're talking about what companies can do, we have to, I would say that my favorite technique for the office is cognitive restructuring, teaching people the role their thinking plays in every single stressful experience that they have. So cognitive restructuring is a um, is a technique that usually describe with this ABC method, which I like to say is easy to remember as ABC. A stands for A stands for the activating event. B stands for your belief about that event, and C stands for the consequence or the sum of A plus B. So if your boss criticizes your work, maybe a little unfairly, maybe a little too much, maybe in front of somebody else, another employee, and your belief is, and this was, it was a psychologist, world famous psychologist named Albert Ellis who came up with this ABC equation, and Ellis loved this thought that what he would describe as an irrational thought that people would have it be, which would be, I've got the world's worst boss. And I think we've all had that thought. I know I used to have it with this boss I had right out of the college that I had. And I've got the world's worst boss. And Ellis would counter somebody that might say that, but how would you even know? If you had every boss in the world, do you really know that your boss is the world's worst? And what he would say is that that's an irrational thought. And we have a lot of irrational thoughts at B. So we might be stuck in a traffic jam where we say, oh, this traffic jam is going to take forever to clear, or I'll never get to work on time, or my coworker is always coming in late. And he likes to say, or he used to like to say, Ellis has been gone for a few years now, but when you hear yourself in your self-talk say the words always or never, it's a sign that your thinking is irrational, because usually nobody always comes in work late. Usually you're not, when you're in a traffic jam, you're never going to get there. That's an exaggeration. And so what Ellis advised was to use the letter D to remind yourself to dispute these overly negative, irrational thoughts. And that's something you do at work pretty easily. So that's the number one technique that I tell people in the workplace to give that a try.
Yeah. Well, and I think that our beliefs are huge. And to your point, we often exacerbate them in our mind, and we make our beliefs bigger than what they really are. And so just being able to say, hey, is this really true? I'm doing a lot of work with internal family systems and parts work, just how, a part of me feels like I have the most stressful boss in the entire world. And then a part of me feels like I have a pretty good job. And the idea of parts work is it's almost like the two things can be true. It's like when you're in a stressful situation, you can say, I feel a lot of stress right now. And two things can be true. I also know that I've been under stress before and I've been able to navigate it. So I think that's another tool that we can remind people that we can feel something and it doesn't have to take over. We can remind ourselves that, yes, I am feeling stress, and I also know that I can cope with it if I remind myself that I have the tools. So I really do feel like, Jim, we've given a lot of tools here. And I know to your point, your website has a lot more. But, we've talked about social support, we've talked about therapy, we've talked about journaling, we've talked about solutions versus problems, the ABC method. And then the two things can be true, just this gentle reminder that it doesn't have to be that way. So, Jim, I just want to, if people want to get a hold of you, how could they get a hold of you, or how could they check out your site?
Well, our website is stressstop.com, three S's in the middle. So two words, stress and then stop. And if they want to get a hold of me, I'm Jim at stressstop.com. So I'd love to hear from anybody who has a question, anybody who wants some information about any of our products. And our web platform actually can be purchased by individuals. So if there's, somebody out there who wants to have something with a lot of advice about stress, it's a great place to start. And one last little tip I wanted to put out there that I always think is just so simple and easy is when you get home tonight, if you're listening to this at work or in the day, write down your top 10 sources of stress. Just make a list of your top 10 sources of stress. And a lot of times you go to sleep on that. Don't even think about it. Go to sleep on it. And you'll be surprised how many solutions you'll come up with.
Yeah, I agree. I 100% agree. And I also agree with the whole social support. The irony, though, I have to put it out there, is that a lot of times our support can be online resources and online things. And yet we often say, well, we're going to try to do less online time. But I think what needs to be said is that, yes, and again, the two things can be true. We do want less phone time, less digital time. However, it's more about the quality of that digital time. If there's a quality source that's online, whether it's a support group or your community gym or whatever it might be, then I think that it's worth getting online. It's just how you intentionally spend that time online, right? I guess it would be the difference between I can listen to hard rock that makes me angry and crazy, or I can listen to classical music that'll calm my nervous system. So it is kind of about being intentional about how we consume information. So, Jim, thank you so much for coming on, and thanks to all of our Strong Mind, Strong Body community. I really appreciate you listening. If there's a topic you really want to deep dive into for 2025, you can email me at Angie at angiemillerwellness.com, or you can hit me up on my Angie Miller Wellness website. But thanks to all of you, and keep doing what you love. We'll see you next week.